How's it going, YouTube? Welcome to BBS Gaming. Today, I wanted to take a quick look at the reworked steel skills in Path of Exile's 3.12 Heist League. We're currently playing on a level 84 champion. We're only halfway ascended, with 3 major ascendancy notables. We have yet to complete Uberlab, and I'll just give you a brief overview of the passive skill tree at the moment. We are currently using two-handed swords, full physical damage, and stacking Impale and Overwhelm nodes. I'm going to need to actually remember that this ascendancy trial is here, because I haven't completed that yet. But the purpose of this video is to showcase, this is one I actually need, I'll do that later. The purpose of this video is to showcase the new steel skill, Splitting Steel. So Splitting Steel is a projectile attack that can only ever fire off one projectile. But if you look very closely, you'll notice that when the projectile explodes, it sends off 4 other projectiles in an intelligent direction that should be smart targeting other nearby enemies. All of these projectiles actually apply impales, and there's actually an AoE component to the skill as well, so you can actually scale up the size of the explosion of that impact with AoE scaling, which is not the way that we're going to take the build, but it is an avenue that you can take. So we're going to clear the backyard real quick. We're also utilizing the reworked Lancing Steel as our single target component, because as you can see, Splitting Steel kind of leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of single target damage. And we'll talk about why that is when I get to the mechanics portion of this video. So, as you can see, we're throwing out our Splitting Steels, and we're using the reworked component of the steel skills, the, what is it called? Call of Steel, which is essentially a brand recall for these steel shards, which is now a stacking resource that you can consume to empower your steel skills. So for Splitting Steel, it causes that forking and then that intelligent seeking of further targets. With the Lancing Steel, it actually gives you more projectiles, a literal more projectile modifier to the Lancing Steel attacks. So as you can see, Lancing Steel consumes 4 of these shards, so we run out of them rather quickly, and then the Splitting Steel only consumes 1 at a time, and then the Call of Steel actually just refreshes all of those. So let's check out our single target damage real quick. So we're currently still progressing our Atlas through the beginning stages. We're only, I believe, in like a, what's the monster level of this map? Monster level 71 map, so this is approximately like a tier 3, tier 4 map. Nothing too insane yet. We're still at the beginning of our Atlas progression. So we're gonna swap stances in the blood stance, and then just focus on keeping our stacks refreshed as much as possible. Throughout the duration of that fight, we're kind of throwing out 3 attacks with Lancing Steel, and then recalling, and then doing another 3 stacks, and then recalling again. And so we're currently only running a Terminus Est, which should be a very accessible League start unique item for operationalizing this kind of character. The Terminus Est is a fantastic choice, obviously. It has a pretty respectable amount of physical damage. It does give you a really nice solid boost of critical strike chance, and this while we actually have all 3 of our frenzy charges, by just getting critical strikes with this, we're able to raise our critical strike likelihood to about 50% at the moment. And then in terms of the gear on this character, we're just stacking anything that has physical damage to attacks, obviously resistances, and life. I don't have anything yet with this character that's too particularly noteworthy. I did get a lucky drop. This Belly of the Beast dropped with a perfectly rolled increased maximum life percentage, which is definitely helping out in terms of our tankiness. And as I said, physical damage to attacks, life, resist. Physical damage to attacks, life, resist. That's about it so far with this character. So, as you saw, a little bit of the clear potential and definitely some of the single target with this character. This is shaping up to be a pretty solid league start choice. I'm actually having some pretty smooth progression through my Atlas. I'm very happy with my choice, and I like to think that Grinding Gear Games did an absolutely amazing job in reworking this family of skills. I think that steel skills were already kind of in a great place. I know that a lot of people didn't really necessarily love Lancing Steel, and I think once the information gets spread about properly in how to utilize the new reworked Lancing Steel, I think people will come to find that Lancing Steel is an incredibly potent single target boss killing skill now. It is really satisfying. really satisfying. So I'm going to clear out this room since I actually do need to progress this portion of my character, and we'll get to a nice safe spot once I clear out this little pack here. And so let's take a quick look at what's actually going on with this character. So as I stated, we are a champion, and we're not quite fully ascended at the moment. We're only level 84, and I, in its endgame, want this character to specifically dip into the Vicious Skewering, as well as the Deep Cuts Delirium Cluster Jewels. And so we're already working on our Cluster Jewel down here. This is just a relatively decent increased physical damage, and we're taking advantage of the Overwhelm mechanic, which is essentially a damage penetration type for physical damage skills, which obviously these steel skills are physical. And then I'm just a huge fan of chance to deal double damage, so we've taken Force Multiplier here. Iron Breaker is our Overwhelm. And then to dip in further to the Overwhelm, we're taking Blade Dancer, which is just really nice for sword-based builds, and it gives us an additional 10% Overwhelm. We're not actually a melee attack. Both Lancing Steel and the Splitting Steel are both considered projectile attacks, so we don't actually benefit from the melee strike range. Unfortunate. It's an important thing to note, though, because actually it renders these kinds of notables like Master of the Arena completely worthless, because these are increased melee physical damage nodes. So these give us no benefit whatsoever, which is why we're opting for the attack speed. And being that we're using a two-handed weapon, it's very nice. Hi, Maya. Hey, how's it going, honey? She's excited. She doesn't know who I'm talking to. So, we're a full physical damage build that is utilizing the Impale mechanics in order to get the most bang for the buck with our relatively low investment, being that this is a league start. This is actually my first character this league. So we're taking Forceful Skewering. We're taking Harpooner, knowing that eventually when we come across our medium cluster jewel and get access to the Deep Cuts and Vicious Skewering nodes, we're actually going to delete this whole section and throw it on to our medium cluster jewels to take advantage of the additional Impale stacks, as well as the extra damage on hit and extra damage with the ailments that we are applying. At the moment, we are utilizing some bleed, but that's actually because these skills are relatively challenging to find adequate support gems for, and I'll go over that in just a moment. But to finish off the skill tree, the most important notables, in my opinion, are the Swift Skewering notables. This is your bread and butter Impale wheel right here. And then, as I've said, I want to get a little bit of bleed damage in with this character as well. I just like it, and it's a mechanic that I haven't messed around with too much. And I feel like the Crimson Dance node, in conjunction with the way that Lancing Steel works now, is going to be able to very rapidly apply some pretty substantial bleeds in the end game. We're not there yet, though, so let's not worry about that too much. So, that being said, Iron Grip is something that I'm trying out because we are taking some strength nodes throughout our passive tree here. Although this is giving us not so much damage at all, really. So there's a likelihood that I'll be dropping this for the Impaler at some point, which actually applies 4 impales with 1 singular hit, as opposed to 1 per hit. But it does have a drawback of only allowing us to apply those 4 impales once every 4 seconds. So I have to do a little bit more of my homework on how Impale actually works to find out what the baseline duration of Impale stacks actually are, and if I can relatively easily push my Impale durations beyond the 4-second marker, I'll consider taking the Impaler. This will be more for clearing packs rather than clearing bosses. So let's take a look at the support gems. So as I've said, I take this with a grain of salt. I'm currently utilizing Chance to Bleed as just predominantly another source of physical damage. This gem actually gives us some flat physical damage, which is very nice for the skill. Being that we are stacking impales, flat physical damage actually goes quite a long way in increasing our damage ceiling as we layer those stacks of impales on our enemies. So the flat damage I value a little bit more than percent physical damage, but that's just a personal preference. Our Lancing Steel, being that it's our single target, is currently linked up in a 5-socket, 5-link setup, I suppose, is a better way to say that. I'm currently trying out Vicious Projectiles because of the bleeds, obviously. This is obviously a more damage modifier in a multitude of ways. So we're taking advantage of the more physical damage over time, which would be our bleeds, but we're also taking advantage of the more physical damage for projectile attacks. This is really nice because, as I've stated before, both of our skills, our pack clearing skill and our single target skill, are both projectile attacks. So this is a really, really nice support gem for this skill, and it's probably our biggest source of damage in terms of our supports at the moment, next to Brutality support. Brutality is just a more physical damage modifier that basically deletes all of the other forms of damage that you could potentially deal. So you don't want any kind of added elemental damage, and doing a poison-based build with this character is not going to work because poison is a chaos damage school, and therefore we wouldn't be dealing any chaos damage and subsequently not applying any poisons. Finally, we're using Maim support, yet another more physical damage modifier. You also get the added benefit of a 30% chance to maim, which slows down your enemies, and that can be kind of helpful in a kiting situation, which I honestly don't find myself in very often with this character because our damage is already kind of through the roof. I should mention the Splitting Steel is hooked up with Impale support, and I need you to hear me out on this because at some point or another, this final link right here will also be Impale support. And now, both of these skills already have Impale mechanics baked into them, and what I mean by that is the actual attack active skill gem has a built-in 60% chance to impale enemies with the Splitting Steel, and I believe it's a 25% chance, a 20% chance to impale enemies with the Lancing Steel. So the steel skills automatically have a chance to apply your impales. However, what's important about the Impale support is the bottom line, where it states impale damage dealt to enemies impaled by supported skills overwhelms 30% physical damage reduction. So of all of the overwhelm that is available on your passive skill tree, you can only get about 60%. I believe it's 57% overwhelm is available on the passive skill tree. You can find those in the kinetic impacts, which gives you quite a lot of damage with two-handed melee weapons. It gives you a nice little stun chance. It gives you a chance for double damage. And then it also gives you 15% physical damage overwhelm. Then the Forceful Skewering gives you another 10%. Down here you have Blade Dancer. This is another 10%. Swift Skewering also gives us something like 10%. And then the final one is Master of Force, which for us, we will need to anoint this onto our amulet at some point or another, which is going to be interesting because it doesn't appear that it's anointable now that I'm looking at it, but we'll see about that. The passive skill tree used to tell you the anoint recipes on each of the notables, and it no longer does, so fingers crossed we will be able to anoint Master of Force on our amulet at one point, which will give us a nice amount of physical damage as well as the remainder of that Overwhelm. And so Overwhelm is a mechanic that cannot reduce the enemy's physical damage resistance below 0. And so in most cases when you're pack clearing, you're not going to feel it that much. The enemies are just going to get one shot harder. They're going to die in one hit even faster, which is imperceptible. But in your boss killing situations, the Overwhelm is tremendous. You can have situations where with no Overwhelm, a boss takes several hits, feels highly resistant, and then with full Overwhelm, it almost makes the boss feel as though it's just like a rare pack or a champion mob or something. It's not really as threatening or as tanky, and you kind of melt right through the enemies in a hilariously quick manner, as you've already seen. I mean, I killed Alhazmin in what, 7 seconds on completely budget gear. It's pretty nice. So let's talk a little bit about the potential that this skill will eventually offer. Oh, that horse scared the shit out of me. So, one of the coolest things that happened to the Steel family of skills in 3.12 is the Call of Steel button. Now, this is a button that kind of like Focus, any gem that is of the Steel skill family is going to automatically give you not just the active skill button, the Splitting Steel or the Lancing Steel, but it's also going to give you this Call of Steel, or sort of a built-in brand recall for Steel skills, that, as you can see, give you these cute little broken swords. And each one of these swords is broken up into 4 pieces, so these are actually representative of the stacks that you have. As you can see, the swords are actually disappearing from my character as I continue to expend those stacks. So it's a nice little visual representation so you can see what you're doing, but what's really cool about this is not only do the Steel skills hit really hard at baseline, but Call of Steel is actually a secondary attack. So Call of Steel, although it doesn't say that it deals any numeric damage, it actually does. So let's read it together. It says, removes the impaled debuffs from enemies alive or dead, which is very important, and I'll explain that in a minute, in a large area around you to gain Steel shards. It deals reflected damage in a small area around each such enemy, the impaled enemies, based on the impales removed from them. So it pulls out all of the Steel shards that you have implanted into the enemies around you. And so here's a really cool thing. Continues to grant shards over time, which, as you saw, it just refills your shard stacks. The best part of this skill is actually in the skill description. It says reflect damage around each enemy equal to the damage of removed impales multiplied by the number of hits that they have left. I'll say that again. Reflects physical damage around each enemy equal to the damage of removed impales multiplied by the number of hits that they have left. So let's talk about what the Impale mechanic actually is. So the Impale you can think of as a debuff. You apply a singular Impale debuff, which is I believe it's 10% of the physical damage that you deal in the overall hit gets recorded. So let's say you deal 1,000 damage, right? So 10% of 1,000 would be 100. That 100 damage gets recorded and then stacked on top of any subsequent hit. So the next hit will deal 1,100 damage, but it will also apply a slightly larger Impale stack. So that next Impale stack will actually be 110 damage. And that can stack up to 6 times that baseline if I'm not mistaken. Which means by the end of those stacks, you're getting more than 100 damage per stack. And I think that number keeps refreshing and scaling higher and higher. So if you want to just sit and just drill an enemy and then yoink your shards back and keep on doing it, I don't think that there's a cap. So in the context of the Call of Steel, it specifically says multiplied by the number of hits that they have left. And now, if I'm correct in my assumptions about how this skill actually works, what that means is you're recording an individual hit, right? Your initial Impale is recording 10% of whatever the damage of that first hit is. And so assuming that we have 6 Impale stacks that we can apply to our enemies, we're going to take one of those Impale stacks and apply it to the enemy, and then when we recall, we multiply whatever that impaled damage is by 5, which is the number of remaining stacks that we have. So with the example that I gave earlier, let's say this initial hit deals 1,000 damage. We're recording 100 of that, and then when we yoink the shards back, we're dealing 500 damage as reflected damage, which is impossible to mitigate by your enemies. They take the full amount of that damage and it explodes in an AoE. So it can actually hit more enemies than you initially hit. And now I say that this is important and kind of interesting because you can do certain things like, let's say for instance, your splitting steel hits don't kill the enemy. Let's say your splitting steel does approximately 80% of your enemy's life. Well, you could link up your splitting steel to culling strikes, which doesn't actually increase the numeric damage that your attack does, but what it will do is if you're only dealing 81% of the total maximum life to your target, meaning that they would have 19% of their health remaining, that culling strike will deliver the remaining 19% damage that is needed to actually kill that target. And being that you can use Call of Steel on corpses to return those shards to you, that's actually giving you 20% more damage to your Call of Steel. So it's not actually giving you a number value tooltip DPS buff, but it is giving you a buff to the damage of your Call of Steel, the recall of the shards. So that's just one interesting thing about this skill. One of the things that I also think is very interesting about the way splitting steel works is it's an interaction between the splitting steel and the Call of Steel. So as I've stated, the damage, so it says it reflects physical damage around each enemy equal to the damage of removed impales. It's a plural. So let's say, obviously splitting steel is an AoE, right? It has this AoE impact on its initial hit, and then each projectile actually still has an AoE as well. In the real heat of battle, you can jump into the middle of a pack and actually just explode the entire pack with a single attack of splitting steel. It's actually very satisfying. So what's really interesting is rather than, let's say, we'll use the example of 1,000 damage again, right? So you're dealing 1,000 damage to each target. It's snapshotting 100 damage from that. But let's say that splitting steel is capable of hitting 12 enemies, right? So you're hitting each one of those 12 enemies. You're recording 100 damage from each of the enemies that you hit. And then when you recall, not only are you recalling the impaled damage from 12 targets, which is 100 times 12, so 1,200 damage, more than the initial hit. You're then multiplying that figure by your remaining impale stacks on each one of those targets, which in the baseline scenario of having a maximum potential of 6 impale stacks that you can place on an enemy, you're multiplying that subsequent figure by 5. And obviously this scales for every single additional Impale stack that you can take. So that's why we've chosen a champion. We get 2 additional Impale stacks, bringing our total potential stack up to 8. And once we get 1 or 2 deep cuts, I don't know. I haven't had my finger on the pulse of Path of Exile for a little while, so I don't know where our Impale ceiling is. But, you know, with the baseline assumption that we're dealing 100 reflected damage in our Impale stack with our initial hit, in the scenario of killing, let's say, 10 enemies with that single hit, that means that that recall is going to be 1,000 reflected damage multiplied by 5. So that takes our initial 1,000 damage hit and recalls it back as 5,000 reflected damage in an area. Now, obviously, this is limited to just that area, but in the case of Heist, where you're waiting for your compatriot to open up those doors and you have all of those reinforcements lining up on the other side of that wall, you can throw out a couple hits and then jump into the pack and recall, and you're going to basically quintuple, quadruple, triple your damage that you've applied from the hallway before. So in the context of Heist, it's actually really nice to be able to load up an area, enter that area, and then deal substantially more damage than you would have if you entered the area, then started attacking. Technically both work, but it's a playstyle choice. I'm sure there are a multitude of other really interesting and really exciting things that you can do with the new steel skills. I think the rework on this family of skills is really, really excellent and really exciting. I'm seeing unimpeded progress with this character. Let's check out a few things. Now, I am one of those people that will leave my character logged in and walk away from the PCs, so even though we're only on day 3 of the league, this figure is abstract and not exact. But I've been playing this league for, let's call it 24 hours so far. And, forgive me. And the character's only died 9 times, and 2 of those were just like brain dead AFK stupid things. And one of them was actually a bug that got patched out this morning. There's an attack that the Heist enemies can do that was doing substantially more damage than was intended. And now, on that note, there was a patch this morning on day 3 of Heist that stated that actually splitting steel has not been working as intended since the beginning of the league. It's actually been buffed as of this morning. There was some kind of a mechanical issue with the skill wherein the skill was not actually benefiting from added projectile or multiplicative projectile damage that was added from the passive tree or support gems. So that being said, even when the skill was bugged and malfunctioning and substantially less powerful than it should be, it was still feeling very good. So that being said, the skill has actually been buffed this morning. It actually now benefits from all of the projectile additive damage that you can throw at it, the way that it's actually supposed to and intended to. And it feels really strong. Really, really strong. I highly encourage you guys to check it out. This would be a fantastic second character of the league. It's been a fantastic league starter for me. I know a lot of people have tried out the new spells. I know a lot of people have tried out the impending doom mechanics, which seem really cool. If you feel like you're lacking a little bit from your single target damage and you want to take out bosses a little bit easier, I really highly recommend moving towards splitting steel, lancing steel. And in terms of my character, the two-handed progression is going really well so far. I want to leave you guys with a little food for thought. There is this brand new wheel over here, which, forgive me, I don't know if this has been hyped up already. I have, as I said, not really been directly on the pulse of this game for a couple of weeks now. And so this is brand new information for me. The trick shot, split shot, and piercing shot have a lot of potential in the context of a Deadeye with these new steel skills. I'll just leave it at that. There's a lot of fun things that you might be able to do with 2 additional pierces, some extra chance to fork and generate an additional arrow, as well as increased damage for each chain, which would be incredibly strong on Lancing Steel. So you could check it out with a champion, you could check it out with a Deadeye. I'm sure it would work fine with a Raider as well. One of the things that I should mention is that this is not a Berserker-friendly build in the sense that Rage is a mechanic that only works with melee skills. And so that being said, this is not a melee skill. So the Berserker would not benefit from its Rage mechanic entirely. Initially I thought, hey, Warcries would be really cool to juice this thing up, but unfortunately, it's not going to work out as well as you might like with the Marauder Berserker. So I'm just going to leave you guys with that. We are undergoing a little bit of a rebranding here at the channel. I just want to talk about that really quickly and briefly. I'd like to, from this point forward, consider this the DVS Gamers channel, as opposed to Salt Princess's YouTube channel. I get a lot of flack for the name. I feel like the name is bait for a lot of negativity. I feel like that name is not reflective of who I actually am as a gamer. I'm not actually all that salty of a gamer at all, actually. And I feel like it's just an inappropriate misnomer that encourages a lot of negativity. And I no longer want this channel to be a negative mental attitude kind of channel. We're going to redirect into some positive mental attitude. And so I'd like to commemorate that by just retitling the name of the channel to DVS Gaming. So I'm going to go forward as DVST, the figurehead of DVS Gaming, the new brand, I suppose. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this informative and maybe a little bit exciting, and I hope you see the same potential with the skill that I see. I'm having a great time with the new league. The league's relatively simple, which is totally okay with me, because the mechanical changes of these skills and the performance of Path of Exile holistically feels really, really good right now. And so I think it's going to be a pretty great league. I hope you guys have a wonderful league as well. And as per usual, if you guys get the opportunity to, try and do something nice for somebody. And until next time, take care.